And now, marine weather around Alaska.
Hi there, I'm National Weather Service Meteorologist Peter Chan with your Alaska Marine Weather Outlook on this Tuesday, October 29th, 2024. And we start with the development of the sea ice. We are still early in the new season, but the ice is taking hold now. We did have a pretty powerful storm about a week ago come on through these regions with some high winds breaking up the early ice formation, but now we can see that it's trying to reestablish all along areas of the north, the Beaufort Sea coast, the Chukchi Sea coastline, down along areas of the Seward coastline, including in and around Norton Sound, Koyuk, and down toward off of Imanik. We also see the ice building along the Russian Arctic coast and up here through the Bering Strait, and this trend will only continue as we get deeper into fall and the winter season and the colder air becomes more entrenched. But in the meantime, later tonight, early on Wednesday, we have a low pressure system as of this Thursday afternoon. It's up here in the northwest quadrant of the Gulf, but it'll be heading southeastward late tonight, early on Wednesday morning. Another deep low in the western Bering, 955 millibars with a occluded front arcing out ahead of it. As we get into Wednesday afternoon, that low will slowly begin to fill and the occluded front will be pushing inland across the YK Delta on up toward St. Lawrence Island with a band of snow that may end up changing over to a mix of precipitation or even some rain as it pushes inland. The low that was in the Gulf will be then sinking south of Haida Gwaii back into the North Pacific. That low is actually going to come on shore Thursday afternoon, evening along the Washington-Oregon coastline. But by the time we get into Thursday afternoon, this occluded front has pushed into the southwest interior, lower part of the Alaska Range, and we are going to see a secondary weaker low form in the western Gulf. This is not going to turn into a big storm, but it will have another band of snow that'll push up into areas of south central, lighter snowfall than this most recent one. And of note, we have a 961 low, another deep low coming out of the North Pacific. That is forecast to track south of the eastern Aleutians and the Alaska Peninsula and then into the Gulf for this coming weekend. So that'll be the next notable weather maker coming up here by the end of the week. In the meantime, Wednesday, we expect winds in the Panhandle. Inner channel, southeast winds 30 knots, 9-foot waves there, Ketchikan, Metlakatla there in the part of Dixon Entrance. North-northwest winds 15 to 20 knots, though gusts could be as high as 35 knots, Lynn Canal. And then for the outer coast, we're looking at easterly winds, Gustavus to off of Sitka and Craig, highest south of Sitka, 30 to 35 knots with 17-foot swells. Northeast winds out of Yakutat Bay turning more northerly off of Cape Suckling at 20 knots with 14-foot waves. Thursday winds come down across the entire region. That low will finally be departing. Southeast winds 10 knots, inner channels, waves maybe a couple of feet. For the outer coast, south-southeast winds generally around 15 knots, though it could be as high as 20 knots outside of Yakutat Bay to Cape Suckling. Swells generally 7 to maybe as high as 8-9 feet. For Wednesday, with the departing low, we find northerly winds here within Prince William Sound with 4-foot waves there, 25-knot northerly winds. Winds will be northeast to north outside of here, Cordova, outside of Hinchinbrook Entrance, as high as 35 knots there outside of the Copper River drainage, and waves 16 feet. Lower Cook Inlet, North Kodiak Island, northwest winds to 35 knots after storm force winds tonight, 9 to 12-foot waves, and winds north-northeast, middle Upper Cook Inlet with 3-foot waves. On Thursday, east winds within Prince William Sound at 20 knots, 3-4-foot waves. Look for generally east-southeast winds outside of Hinchinbrook Entrance to 25 knots. Lower Cook Inlet, north winds 25 knots. Northeast winds here outside of Kodiak Island, south of the Kenai Peninsula, with waves 6 to 8 feet there in the vicinity of Kennedy Entrance. Across Kodiak Island on Wednesday, west winds 20 to 25 knots as we drop down along the Alaska Peninsula for south-southeast winds as high as 25 to 30 knots, Cold Bay Falls Pass. And then going into Thursday, winds will be northwest-west in the vicinity of Kodiak Island. Strongest winds off of Akiak up to 30 knots with 9-foot waves. Otherwise, winds west-southwest winds 20 to 25 knots as we go down along the length of the Alaska Peninsula. Swells 5 to as high as 6 feet, or high as 9 feet south of Falls Pass. Within Bristol Bay, waves 3 to 6 feet, but increasing 8 to 12 feet there to the northwest of Cold Bay. The Aleutians, so we have that strong deep low in the western bearing with the front, the occluded front pushing through, so we see the winds increase. 30-knot southwest winds, eastern Aleutians on Wednesday, picking up to 35 to 45-knot southwesterly gales, especially west of Adak through Kiska and Shemya. Waves could be in excess of 30 feet out across the western Aleutians as the result of that windy system. On Thursday, winds southwest to south, 25 to 30 knots over the eastern and central Aleutians, switching more westerly to 30 knots once you get west of Adak, and along areas of the southwest coast. In advance of this occluded front, south winds increasing 40-knot gales there at St. Matthew, 18-foot waves. The Pribilof, south winds increasing to 25 knots. We find east winds within Bristol Bay to 30 knots, 35-knot southeast winds in Kuskokwim Bay, and then offshore flow out of Norton Sound and along the lower Yukon Delta, 30 to 35-knot easterly winds with waves 6 to 7 feet. On Thursday, that front is going to make progress into the southwest interior. Winds will become southwest 15 knots into Bristol Bay and Kuskokwim Bay, but still east-southeast out ahead of that front. East winds there in Norton Sound, but southeast winds kind of long parallel with the front along the lower Yukon coast with 4 to 5 foot waves, and then kind of a mix 25-knot winds southwest in the Pribilofs, but southeasterly 25 knots around St. Matthew, waves 16 to 19 feet out there in the Bering. And then for south of the Bering Strait, east winds 30 to 35 knots there on the north side of St. Lawrence, 6 to 9 foot waves along the west coast of the Seward Peninsula, especially north of St. Lawrence Island. Lower Chukchi Sea, generally easterly winds to 25 knots, waves 4 to as high as 7 feet. And then along the Arctic coast, the Beaufort Sea coastline, east winds 10 to 15 knots with 2 to 3 foot waves. And again, that ice is still building. And for Thursday, easterly winds to 25 knots along the Arctic coast, 5-6 foot waves where there is open water. And then down through the lower Chukchi Sea, we expect easterly winds 25 to 30 knots with waves 5 to 8 feet. And off of the west side of the Seward Peninsula out of Port Clarence, Wales, easterly winds to 20 knots, as well as onto the north side of St. Lawrence Island, and waves as high as 5 to 9 feet through the Bering Strait to the north side of St. Lawrence.